Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and this week we're going to be talking about a comic book that I feel a large percentage of people have never read and may not have even heard of. And honestly, I knew about this comic for a while, but I've only just recently had the opportunity to start reading it myself. It's Project Superpowers number 0. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. First published in January of 2008, we can see here a stunning Alex Ross cover. Alex very seldomly disappoints, if ever. Just wonderful detail, high level artist. I always enjoy seeing his work. Now, this image may look a little bit incomplete, and that's because it is. In order to get the entirety of this image, you had to buy 2 copies of this book. This is the right side and another copy to complete the left side. I only have this one issue of issue number 0. I bought this as a set not that long ago, honestly. And I understand the idea behind doing something like this. Unfortunately, it does feel like a way of trying to get more money out of people. Then again, issue number 0 was only $1, so they weren't exactly asking for the moon either. But there were 5 separate covers for this book. So if you wanted to get all 5, you were going to end up spending $5. But again, at $1 a copy, they were probably selling these at a loss just to try and get the series into people's hands. That's only an assumption. I don't know that for sure, but I struggle to see how they'd be making money at $1 a copy in 2008. Plot, covers, and art direction by Alex Ross. Plot and script by Jim Kruger. Interior art by Doug Klaba, sorry if I'm getting that wrong because I most certainly am, and Stephen Sadowski. Interior paintings by Alex Ross. Lettering by Simon Boland. Colors by Captain Moreno. Alternate incentive cover by Michael Turner with Peter Steigerwald, which, if you see here on the bottom, this is what the 2 combination covers together were supposed to look like. I don't know how well that's showing up on camera. We then get the Michael Turner cover, and then these 2 covers, which are just like negative art versions of the Michael Turner cover and the left side Alex Ross cover. I don't know how many people would have been really stoked to try and get their hands on those, and I can say I've never seen them out in the wild, so I don't know how many of those were printed up. They might actually be kind of rare to get your hands on. The story starts out here in the large, expansive, and somewhat secluded home of one Mr. Bruce Carter III, who is pretty much getting on in years, in the twilight of his life, sitting alone and drinking a whiskey by the fire as he reflects upon some of the things that he's done in his past that he doesn't want to remember, his time in World War II as a soldier. And then his quiet time alone is interrupted when he is approached by a ghostly spirit who tells him that his death is upon him. We see here the spirit coming out through an American flag. And while the specter does have a silhouette or outline of a human figure, it's not a visible being, which is why it remains cloaked in the American flag. We see that Bruce Carter is very much surprised and also somewhat perturbed by what he's seeing, as he states, "Not again, leave him alone," as he throws his drink at the flag. However, it just goes right through and hits the fire behind, the whiskey automatically igniting in the fireplace. He then exclaims that, he has his own life and that the spirit had his, but the spirit then comes back and states that he has never met Bruce Carter before, and that that Bruce Carter is conflating or confusing this spirit with the one of his colonial ancestor, who he has had many encounters with. And this is where it starts to get a little weird, because they are really just throwing you into some deep story points of this book without really giving you any context or explanation. The spirit then basically tells Carter that he is, got very little time left, and that he needs to be held accountable for the wrongs that he's done, as we see the spirit lead Carter up a set of stairs up into his attic and into a room that he has not been into in many, many years. As he walks across the room and sees a sheet pulled down, he remembers why it is he's been avoiding this room for so long. And the reason he's been avoiding this room for so long is because this room houses the portrait of him in his younger superhero crusading days as the hero, the Fighting Yank, who, like all of the other heroes that are featured in this comic book series, is an actual Golden Age character who had fallen into the public domain and that Dynamite decided they were going to use for this story, which is a really cool kind of creative idea. They changed certain aspects about certain characters, but their visual aesthetics are kept mostly intact to what they were originally. And, you know, it is a neat idea to take long since forgotten characters and, you know, insert them as a very large, you know, important part of an ongoing narrative that's brand new to readers, you know, oh God, I guess 75 years later it would have been at that point for a lot of these characters. As Carter falls to his knees, his memories come flooding back to him of his days as the Fighting Yank and his time fighting against the Nazis and the Japanese during World War II. He, as the Fighting Yank, had incredible super strength and nigh invulnerability. These powers, from what it states here, were endowed upon him by wearing this green cape. So he himself has no actual powers. It's the cape itself that bestows these powers upon him. As we also see the spirit still hovering above him, letting him, you know, come to his senses and allowing him to have all these memories flood back into his mind. We then see an advertisement for the PSP game Silent Hill Origins. If you ever played, or if you haven't played this game, it's okay. I've played it. It's not the greatest Silent Hill game, but it's not horrible. It's just kind of there. It exists. It's a Silent Hill game, but honestly, it doesn't measure up to many of the other Silent Hill games, specifically Silent Hill 2, aka the best of all Silent Hill games. We then see this advertisement for Red Sonja as it has existed in the publishing of Dynamite Comics. It is a new Red Sonja story, I believe. This one also has multiple covers. We see the Alex Ross cover here. We also have a Luke Ross and a Fabiano Neves cover. Sorry if I'm saying that wrong, because I probably am. And this kind of illustrates one of the problems I always had with Dynamite as a company, is that, I mean, it just felt like they were just releasing so many covers for every single issue of every single book. And I don't want to be too hard on them, because I understand that they are a smaller company and they don't have the backing of a giant multimedia conglomerate the same way that Marvel and DC do. And they've got to make their money somewhere. But I hate the idea that, like, you know, every single issue that comes out has 3, 4, 5 covers. It's so much, and it really is kind of burdensome on your readers. Getting back to the story, we are now teleported into the past as Bruce Carter remembers his time fighting in World War II with many other superheroes trying to defeat the Axis powers, as they look over a map, and Bruce mentions that this evil is beyond human capacity, which is something that becomes an ongoing story point throughout this issue, as the rest of the heroes seem to kind of scoff at what he's saying. This harkens to the idea that Bruce is always in communication with an ancestor spirit of his from the Revolutionary War, being Bruce Carter the First. And none of the other heroes seem to really believe that this is the case. They all kind of have a feeling that Bruce might be a few slices of bread short of a loaf, is, I guess, the nicest way I can say it. But they, you know, still accept him kind of for who he is and, you know, are willing to fight by his side. However, when they start to rebuke the things that he's saying, the general here steps in. And I don't know if this general is supposed to be a representation of George Patton or Eisenhower, but he steps in stating that, there's a lot of things to show that, he might be onto something, and that Hitler is very obsessed with the occult and is trying to gather a bunch of weird ancient relics, and that there's the possibility that the death camps that he is using to commit genocide against the Jews and a multitude of other different people groups might be some sort of blood ritual sacrifice thing that he's using to try and summon some sort of great evil. However, he's cut off by the Green Llama, who basically thinks that, the general and Bruce Carter are completely, out of line in their way of thinking, and that they need to treat this as a military operation and kind of just get over the thoughts of, there being any kind of weird supernatural element to this, as he believes that this is something that the Germans are just doing to play into the prejudices and or skepticisms of the, religious devout in the Western world. The Black Terror then intercedes and agrees with the Green Llama, stating that this really is not about religion or philosophy or the supernatural, but about understanding and trying to get a true knowledge and understanding of the enemy that they're facing, because only by doing this can they basically defeat Hitler and free Germany from his rule, which this man wearing the chainmail suit, who, by the way, is featured on many pages and has several lines of dialogue, but is never named once in this entire issue, agrees with, stating that in doing these, they'll be able to remove, or in doing those things, they'll be able to remove Hitler himself. The Green Llama states that this is probably the best course of action, and speaks that, the atomic bomb has been completed, mentioning Alan Oppenheimer, but that the Nazis are close to building their own atomic bomb, so they have to strike quickly. The general then takes the fighting Yank off to the side and states to him in secret that they have intel which shows that Hitler has come into possession of an object of great evil and great power, and that if they're not able to get this object away from him, that it could be pretty bad, and that the death camps that they've come across are only the beginning, which is why he needs the fighting Yank to go and steal this item. As they walk away from the table, as the other heroes converse amongst themselves about how best to continue their assault against the Nazis, the general continues to explain to Carter that the object that they're looking for is in fact a box that they believe to be the source of all evil, and that they need to get this away from Hitler, and if they do so, it should topple the Nazis and allow America to rebuild the world upon the principles of freedom. And then we see that they turn back, and Carter begins to remember the way he felt at the time, stating that he knew he needed to do this because he couldn't get the rest of the team members to agree to many things, and that he wanted to make sure that World War II was indeed the war that would end all wars, due to the fact that he didn't want the world to ever have to repeat the level of pain and suffering that he had been witnessing over the past few years. But then he states that he'd rather die than live in a world where so much evil was merely a choice, which is a really cool way of foreshadowing the paradox of what he wants to accomplish, where he wants to take away the ability of, evil people to come to conclusions that can lead other people to commit great acts of evil, but they also want to live in a world that is based upon the fundamentals of freedom, which are conflicting viewpoints in a lot of ways. He wants to limit freedom to preserve freedom, is what he's stating, but not realizing the paradox of that argument as we see him in the future thinking about this time that he had in the past. We then see the Fighting Yank, aka Bruce Carter III, in a plane as he prepares to parachute on a top secret mission into the heart of Germany, as he recalls the meeting that he had with the general, who basically tells him that the object that they're looking for is indeed the actual Pandora's box, which, for a long time was believed to be an object of myth and legend, but in actuality was a real thing, that when Pandora opened it, it released all of the evil into the world, but also released hope as well. However, over the centuries, the evil was drawn back into her box after it was resealed, until it was found again by Adolf Hitler during the First World War. He then opened the box again, releasing the evil that was necessary to create the formation of Nazi Germany, and again released hope from the box as well, which the general believes manifested itself in the superpowered beings that now exist all throughout the globe. As we see the Yank parachuting into Berlin and, kind of just landing off by himself. This is a real Black Ops mission. He hides his parachute, also thinks back to the pictures that the general was showing him, discovering that Pandora's box is in fact actually an urn. We see that the Fighting Yank is slowly creeping up into what looks to be some sort of a castle or medieval fortress of some kind with a giant swastika banner, and thinking about the words that the general was telling him about how he has to find this object and bring it back to America if they want to have any hope of being able to end this war swiftly and also be able to prevent this war from ever happening again. We then see Carter reach his hand out of the shadows and grab a Nazi guard, pulling him back, obviously taking him out. Then also recalling when he finally accepted the file and the mission from the general. We then see him fighting a whole slew of Nazi soldiers. They obviously stand no chance. Like I said, he's nigh invulnerable, as we see bullets just bouncing off of him and ricocheting into other soldiers. He's, clearly, outclassing every last one of the soldiers tasked with guarding this facility, as we see him run up a staircase past all the bodies of the soldiers he's dispersed, and finally getting to apparently the room where they had this urn stored, as we see him standing with the urn in his hands and looking out, realizing that he has to get back to the States now so that they can continue with their mission to try and seal evil back within the urn, but then finds himself surprised that all of the world's evil was contained and then released from such a simple, fragile object, and, states how it would be just like the gods to put something, or put all the forces needed to damn humanity in such an everyday, ordinary item. After returning back to America, we see the Fighting Yank is surrounded by quite a few scientific officers who are conversing with him, and he's asking them, if the urn was already opened once, how could it have been opened again? And if the evil is naturally drawn back into the urn, is there any way that they could potentially speed up the process? They then give him two new devices they've been working on, one of which works somewhat like a Geiger counter, but is actually made, I guess, to be like a spectrometer, which is pseudoscience in my opinion, but in the context of this comic book, it's a real thing. And also a mask that allows him to see things on the electromagnetic spectrum. Both of these devices were co-designed by Alan Oppenheimer in this story. Carter remembers that his ancestral spirit did not want him to put the mask on. He wanted him to trust in the guidance that he was giving him. But against his wishes, we see Carter put the mask on and then see the horrible, monstrous hell beasts that inhabit the spectral world, and also his ancestral spirit, who we're seeing for the first time, asking him, do you see them now? Because they're watching you. And he then states for Carter, what are you waiting for? Open the urn. Carter does so, but states that it's not working, as he is then sliced across the chest by one of the monsters. And then his ancestor yells at him, that he has to take the visor off immediately. Carter does so and realizes that no one else in the room was ever able to see any of the things he saw, and then decides from this point on he's going to ignore the advice of all of the science officers and trust exclusively in his ancestral spirit, because he believes that the creatures can once again be entrapped, and if they do so, and if he's able to do this, he can end all the suffering in the world. He believes this because his ancestral spirit told him that this was the case, and he is now following that spirit with literally no, questioning of any of that spirit's guidance, which doesn't seem like the best idea, but it's what, Carter has decided is the plan he's going to follow. However, sealing all of the evil away back into the urn will in fact come at a terrible cost, as we see the Fighting Yank has gathered all of the superheroes fighting along with the allies together in a room, and states that the only way that they can draw the evil back into the urn is for them to sacrifice themselves to be pulled into the urn first and draw all the evil in along with them, sealing them away for potentially eternity. He then thanks the devil, aka the death-defying devil, who, by the way, is actually the original design for Marvel's Daredevil, which I think at the time it was designed, it was under Timely Comics, if I'm remembering that correctly. However, this design had fallen into the public domain, which is how Dynamite was able to use it. Of course, they can't in any way use the word Daredevil in the sense of calling him that, because Marvel still owns the trademark on that. However, after he, thanks the devil for showing up, the Green Llama interrupts him, stating that he shouldn't be thanking any of them, as none of them have actually agreed to his plan yet, because, truth be told, they're all quite skeptical of the fact that this is going to work and believe that the Yank is becoming more and more unstable by the day. The Yank, however, continues to try and persuade them, as he states that, the Allied forces will easily win the war once evil is entrapped. But the Black Terror is very skeptical of this, stating that, the Yank is trying to get them to do this and not even providing them with any evidence. He then lifts his shirt, showing them the scars left on his chest by one of the creatures, stating that this should be plenty of evidence for them. He's interrupted by this woman, who is also never named, but is apparently a sidekick of the Flame, or potentially his wife or daughter or something. Again, it's not really explained, and her name is never given during this issue. She thinks that he needs to see a doctor, but, he tells her that he's fine and that he's having them look at it so that they can see. However, he realizes that none of the heroes are buying his story and believe that he inflicted these wounds on himself. The Flame then tries to persuade Bruce to be more realistic, stating that, Bruce knows what the origins of the Flame's powers are, kind of implying in this little bit that the Flame himself is a very devout Christian man and that his powers come from God. It's not really stated, but it is implied. But, Carter once again believes that, they're not listening to him. He states that, they think he's talking to ghosts, plural, when in fact he's only talking to ghosts, singular, his ancestor. He then asks them how he could have possibly known so many things that he shouldn't have and gotten them out of so many different jams if it were not for his ancestral spirit's guidance. He then asks the Green Llama, if one ghost can exist, is it not possible that more could exist? But the llama kind of brushes this off and states that, Yank is really starting to reach in terms of his logic. The woman then approaches Yank and states that he talks to himself, but the Yank states that he is not talking to himself, he is talking to his ancestral spirit. And then he realizes that, unfortunately, the people he really was hoping he could count on to go along with his plan have no intention of going along with this idea, and that he's going to have to make them go along with this against their will one way or another. As Yank continues to remember these things, he states that he continued to fight alongside of his allies as they continued to fight against the Nazis, but he believes that they were foolish in thinking that they could end the scourge of evil through traditional means, and that they were unable to see what he could see, and that the things that, or the evil that they thought they were defeating was only scratching the surface of something blacker beneath the surface that they could not see. We then see on the next page another cool piece of artwork by Alex Ross of the Black Terror. And this is really just a thank you to all of the different comic book stores that ordered the first issue of Project Superpowers, and a special shout out to several of the comic book stores that ordered exceptionally large numbers, one of which is Midtown Comics. Obviously, it's a big, huge store, and some others that were across the country. I thought that was a really cool little idea and shout out that Dynamite decided to give to these retailers for supporting what was in fact a brand new property in, relatively large numbers. On the next page, we get an advertisement for Zorro #1 as published by Dynamite Comics. I've never read any of these comics. Zorro's he's a cool character, but again, he's not a character that's ever really, grabbed me. And if I recall, I don't remember being terribly impressed by the artwork in this book. I do remember picking it up and kind of flipping through the pages. But that's not to say it was necessarily bad. I've never read it. It just wasn't something that actually grabbed onto me. As the story continues, we see that the heroes are celebrating the victory in Europe. However, the Yank does not believe that their celebration is warranted, as he believes that once again they don't understand the bigger picture, believing that the only reason they were able to win is because evil had lost faith in its current herald, namely Adolf Hitler, and that was what allowed them to gain the upper hand. He also remembers at this point that Japan had not surrendered, and that the atomic bomb was then dropped on top of Hiroshima. And he also brings up a good point that, this horrible weapon was, as all weapons, designed as an evil intended to end evil, which I feel like is actually a really insightful take on this. I understand what the creation of the atomic bomb was and why it was used, but the reality is, it was dropped on civilian targets, and, it wasn't like we were dropping this on military bases or large gatherings of naval units. These were civilian targets that were civilian targets in the middle of a full-scale war, which meant there were no fighting age men or soldiers really in these cities. It was all, women, children, elderly. It was a really kind of, one of those things that you look back and you wonder, was there a better way that it could have been done? And was there a way that it could have been done that didn't, result in such incredible levels of death and destruction? Maybe not, but you kind of wish that, there was another way to go about it. We then see this really cool 2-page splash image of an epic battle going on as the Allied superheroes were dispatched to Japan to try and convince the Japanese to surrender peacefully before they dropped a second atomic bomb on the city of Kokura. Unfortunately, the Japanese did not oblige and decided to fight against the superheroes, as we see a lot of the soldiers here shooting at many of the superheroes. And in the background, we get a cool image of the Golden Age supervillain, the Claw, who is kind of a arch nemesis figure that they're against. Also, I don't know if this is supposed to be the scale where he's giant size and fighting other giant sized superheroes. That may be the case. And also, if you are a bit of a history buff, you may know that, in fact, this is true to life. The original target of the second atomic bomb was the city of Kokura. And when the U.S. military was finally over the city, the cloud cover was so bad that they couldn't see the target that they were supposed to be aiming for to drop the bomb. And they made a few passes over the city, and were never able to get visual confirmation on where they were dropping the bomb. They were wanting to drop it on this city in particular because it was such a hub of like military arsenal for the Japanese, so it would have actually made sense to level a city like this. But because they can never get an actual visual confirmation on this target, they instead decided to create, or basically go to their secondary target, which was Nagasaki. And this, of course, is where the bomb ended up getting dropped, unfortunately for all the inhabitants of the city of Nagasaki. But once again, I do like those little attentions to detail of, bringing an actual historical fact to use with, a fictional story really kind of adds a little bit more, believability to the story as a whole. As the battle intensified and raged on, the Yank became more resolute in what he was about to do. As he approaches the flame from behind, holding the urn in his hand, the flame fighting against the Japanese, turns around and states that he's glad to see the Yank as their mission was successful. He just heard over the radio that they have decided not to drop the bomb on the city of Kokura, as we see the bombers flying through the sky, but we see the bomb bay doors open and the bomb hanging as it is going to be deployed. However, the flame is surprised to see something in the Yank's hand and asks what he's doing and what he's holding. The other superheroes are then shown as they're continuing to fight, believing that they've managed to stop the dropping of a second bomb, when Samson realizes that the planes are not turning around. He jumps into the air, stating he'll stop this. We then see that the Yank says at the same time he will stop this, as there's a huge flash and we see the flame lifting up his arms. All the while, Bruce Carter remembering what was actually happening, that the battle that they had fought against the Japanese was so epic that it created a cloud of debris and dust so thick over the city that the military couldn't see their target. Again, taking a real world event and adapting it for the story at hand. And that the atomic bomb detonating provided the perfect cover that he needed to encompass and encapsulate the flame into the urn, as the flame was the one he needed to get first to make sure that he could draw the evil in behind him. We then are teleported back to the U.S. at the funeral for the flame, whose body they were never able to recover. The narration of Bruce Carter states that there was a lot of speculation about what happened to the flame, and that it was believed that he was consumed by the fire of the atomic bomb that everyone thought that he could control. The pastor who is overseeing the service states that it's rather fitting that they should be talking about, the eternal flame and the eternal light of life, and that how some flames can never be extinguished. And then he starts to go on and talk about the faith that the flame had, kind of reiterating what we were led to believe earlier, that the flame was, a very devout Christian man. After the funeral, the Green Lama approaches Carter and states that he's leaving to return to his order in Tibet, and that while he does have an allegiance to the flag, he's not wanting to be involved in this war or with America anymore. The Yank lets him go, stating that he knew that he and the flame were friends and that he was sorry for his loss. We see the Green Lama fly off as the Yank continues to walk away with the girl from before, whose name, again, is never uttered throughout this entire issue, which I feel like it should have been, given that she's, had multiple pieces of dialogue and appeared in a lot of different panels, but never once is named. He states that he's going to continue to try and help rebuild the world through citizenry, through the citizenship, and more through, like business means. He wants to rebuild the American economy and not focus so much on fighting. She states that the flame was such a good man. Carter says, yes, he was. And then she states, what is that? Some type of ashes from Kokura? And he says something like that, as we see he's pulling out the urn. And then we see him walking away by himself with a trail of what looks to be blood-colored water, kind of insinuating that the Flame's sidekick was the next unwitting victim to be sucked into the urn by Carter. We then get this advertisement for the Lone Ranger hardcover trade paperback, or hardcover trade, I should say, not hardcover trade paperback. Again, this is another thing. I never really read the Lone Ranger series by Dynamite. This was kind of Dynamite's hallmark, was getting a lot of like classic heroes and, creating new stories based around those heroes. They did it also with the Spirit and the Spider and the Shadow and the Phantom and the Green Hornet, whole slew of them. Some of them were kind of cool, the few that I read, but, it wasn't something that I was looking to get like super deep into at the time, nor did I really have the money to. So a lot of it kind of just, was on my radar, but not something I got too deeply involved with. We then see an advertisement for The Boys, which is almost surely the most famous of all of the Dynamite original properties, thanks in no small part to the success of the Amazon Prime series. I unfortunately do not have any issues of The Boys, and most likely will not be buying any in the near future, because due to the success of that TV show, I'm sure that single issue copies of The Boys go for a hefty price tag at this point in time, and I probably don't have enough money to buy this series. Back into the story, we see that the fighting Yank, Bruce Carter III, continued his quest to defeat evil by entrapping all of the other superheroes within the urn, as we see him sneak up and presumably capture the Black Terror, whoever this lightning bolt guy is, whoever this monster face guy is. Again, a lot of these people never actually named throughout this book. And then states once he had captured all of his allies, he then had to continue capturing all of the new superheroes that kept springing up. He then states that the devil almost stopped him and, provided a real challenge to what he was trying to accomplish, as we see the boomerang, the devil's trademark weapon, lying on the ground surrounded by blood with the urn open next to it. And that, Bruce Carter was able to basically finally succeed in what he was trying to accomplish by capturing all of the different heroes that kept springing up. Carter goes on to remember all of the different superheroes that he trapped within the urn, all believing that this was what was necessary to stop evil from perpetuating in the world, and that if they had seen what he could see, that they would have surely done the same. However, we are then snapped back to the present of 2008, where the spirit that appeared to him then asks him, "What exactly did you see? How did you know you were doing the right thing?" He then states that it was because of what he saw with his mask and what he was told by his ancestor spirit, the power of the urn, and then also what he knew in his heart. However, the spirits tells him that his heart lied and that your ancestor was mistaken and that the urn was a trap for you and your friends. However, then we see Carter's ancestor appear, yelling at the spirit, telling him to stop, that he's confusing him. But then the spirit begins to basically lay into Carter's ancestor, saying, what have you really accomplished? The world that you live in today is an America that's controlled by a totalitarian dictatorship, and that the entirety of the American way of life is ruled over by a fascist regime and a militant police force that uses brutality and violence to control the citizenry. That America's endless wars in the East are fought by the reanimated corpses of dead soldiers who were never able to rest because they're just constantly being put back together so that they can fight, in an endless battle for American supremacy. And that the world is controlled, or that all of America is controlled by, so-called super beings who put their corporate and wealth interest at the heart of all of their decisions, not the good of the people. Bruce Carter's ancestor then yells at the spirit, saying that he's insulting his honor and basically belittling the sacrifices made by all of the heroes who are trapped in the urn. But the spirit then tells him that they made no sacrifice, that they were trapped against their will, and that they were denied their final reward and unable to live their lives. Uh, Bruce Carter's ancestor then states that the new world was forged by the blood of many patriots, but the spirit then tells him that he is the blood of those patriots, as the spirit is supposed to be the representation of all of the patriots who have died to protect the core values of America and trying to preserve liberty and freedom. Bruce Carter III then suddenly realizes the error of his ways, stating that he thought he had done the right thing. His ancestor states that he did, but the spirit then tells him that the world is not so simple. Carter then sits with his hands clasped as his ancestor tells him that he needs to continue to trust in him. But the spirit then says, ask yourself, is there still evil in the world? Have you actually accomplished what you set out to do through all your deeds? And Carter realizes that evil is more prevalent in the world now than it ever was before, and that his actions were a complete mistake. As he states, or he asks the spirit what he has to do. The spirit tells him that he needs to travel to Tibet and then meet with the Green Lama, who will know how to help him free the other heroes. Carter states that once he tells the Lama what he has done, the Lama will surely kill him. And the spirit tells him that the Lama already knows he is on his way, and that yes, he will surely die, as his time on this earth is very limited. And on the final page of the story, we see that Bruce Carter is encouraged to hurry, for his time is short, and the fate of America lies in his hands, as he must free all of the heroes trapped in the urn, who we see in another fantastic Alex Ross painting, are all hovering inside of the urn in limbo, as we see the story is to be continued. On the next page, we get the Fighting Yanks War Journal, as we see once again the portrait of him standing in front of the tanks and the soldiers fighting against the Nazis, and how, there's little writings here of what Carter realizes he's not certain of the things that he used to be certain of, and believes that he and his ancestor spirit took the wrong path and led the world to, basically the sad state that it's in now, and turned America into a horrible fascist dictator nation state in which freedom is essentially just gone. On the next page of the War Journal, we see this picture of the Green Lama, and Yank talks about how the Lama was a devout Buddhist and always able to maintain his composure, even when they had spirited debates about the nature of evil and the nature of humanity, and, what was the best course of action to try and eradicate evil from the world and try to keep humanity on a course that would be beneficial to everyone living in the world. And then on the next page, we see the talk of the American spirit, who is, again, like I said, supposed to be the embodiment of all of the patriots who have ever fallen, trying to preserve the ideals of the American experiment of, freedom and liberty, and trying to create a just society. And he's not sure if he can trust this creature, but he does believe that he made a grave mistake in the choices that he made in his past, in, following his ancestors' guidance and trapping all of his, friends, quote unquote, and, allies within the urn in a vain attempt to try and eliminate evil from the world. On the next two pages, we are treated to some behind the scenes information about the creation of this book, as we see Alex Ross's original sketch of the giant 2-page splash of the battle in Japan. And then we see the finalized sketch version by Steven Sadowski, I believe is how you say that. It looks like Sadowski. If I'm wrong, I apologize. And we then see Alex Ross's color guide, and then the final colored version that we saw in the book. I like the inclusion of this kind of stuff, where they show, the making of and what the processes they took were in completing their stories and the way that they went about making the book that we're reading. On the last page of the book, we see Dynamite Dispatches, which is just kind of talking about Dynamite news, upcoming comic books, basic things to keep up to date about if you're a fan or were a fan at this time of Dynamite's publishings. And on the reverse inside cover, we get a list of all of the different collected editions that are available through Dynamite Publishing at this time. Actually kind of a cool little checklist if this was stuff that you were interested in reading and wanting to find, and also having a way to know what exactly there was out there for you to look for. And that was Project Superpowers number 0. I really enjoyed this issue. As I stated at the beginning of the video, I had never had the opportunity to read any of Project Superpowers before now. I was peripherally aware of it and didn't really know much about it other than the fact that it involved a lot of Golden Age superheroes that were being reused and repurposed for this story, which I thought was a really cool and unique idea. And now that I've had the opportunity to read this issue, I am very intrigued by where this story will go. It did a very good job in this issue of setting up a story that feels like it's going to be very big and very epic, but is also very mysterious. It doesn't give away any more story points than it absolutely needs to in this first issue, but it does that in a way that is, keeping you wanting more and makes you want to keep reading to find out where this story is going to go. I honestly feel like this is the best or one of the best ways to do mysterious writing in comics, where you give the reader just enough to know what's going on and be able to comprehensively follow the story at hand, but not enough that they're able to, know the full extent of where the story's going to go. And that way they keep coming back to find out. I think it's masterfully done so far. We'll see if that holds up. I'm not reading ahead of where I'm at in these videos, so every time I make a video on Project Superpowers, I will have only made it to the issue that I'm making the video about. Now, your opinions may be a little different. Maybe you've read Project Superpowers and hated it. Maybe you loved it. Maybe you've never heard of it at all, and this is your first experience with it, and you're finally getting a chance to learn what this story is about the same way that I am. And if that's the case, cool. I'm glad you're here for it. But everyone's entitled to their own opinions, and that's okay. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.